So my goal to get the belt, and from there I'm just gonna think about business, because what I wanted to be a world champion right now. I don't think about like after who I'm gonna fight. I just focus on Islam and about this fight. I'll take care about this fight, and from this fight I'm gonna when I win the title, the sport things is done. It's gonna start just business, and I'm gonna pick who with who UFC pays me more, I'm gonna fight, and doesn't matter who is gonna be. No, right now it's a legacy to be a champion, and then business. After this fight, when I'm champion, I'm just gonna think about money, not about like to be two times champion or like defend 10 times. I'm just gonna think about like money fights.
So Arman wants to win the belt and then get right into the money fights. It's that new trend with, Ilya Zepori doing the same thing. Sean O'Malley wanted to do the same thing. And so did Merab with wanting to fight O'Malley instead of Umar. But again, it's the UFC. They have to have these champions fight the number one contenders. This new era of champions don't want to go through the legacy route of the old heads, right? The old head champions like Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Rich Franklin, Matt Hughes. These guys mimicked what the old boxing champions were doing. Win the belt, stay as champ, and defend the title as many times as they could. And that is the way you become a great fighter in the sport. That's the way you also make a lot of money. But the Conor McGregor era changed that. And now we're seeing the new champions after that. Now Arman could lose to Islam and then he wouldn't become champion and wouldn't do these things. But Islam's not going to be a champion forever, right? He's not going to be fighting forever. So what is the next champion going to do? If all these guys are influenced by the Conor McGregor era, that has become essentially like the new standard for a lot of these guys. Are they just all going to do the same kind of thing? Arman might eventually become the champion. This might not be his first title shot if he loses to Islam. And it's essentially just up to the UFC to allow these champions to do that. But they all have this aspiration. They all have this goal of becoming a two-division champion, going for money fights. It's like their legacy ends with becoming a champion. And then after that is for them to make all the money they can and then exit the sport. But now that's created a new standard that the other champions and fighters want to mimic. The new standard for a champion is to win the belt and go right to the money fights or try to be a double champ. Before, fighters rarely thought about moving weight classes and rarely thought about these money fights while holding on to their belt. Only one fighter ever did it before Conor, and that was BJ Penn, because his division was extremely shallow back then. Lightweight barely had any talent when he was champion. Every other time a super fight was thought of, it was some insanely ambitious event for the sport. Anderson Silva vs. George St. Pierre was one of them. So was Anthony Pettis vs. Jose Aldo, Anderson Silva vs. John Jones vs. Cain Velasquez. These are the only times a super fight was a realistic discussion for the UFC. Now it's every fighter that wins a belt. Everyone wants a super fight, to the point that fans are sick of the talk. Like, when fans should not be sick of super fights. That's an insane thing to think about. Fans are sick of the idea of super fights now, because every champion wants to do it. It's watered down when the fans should be excited for that, right? They should be excited for those fights. And honestly, the only super fights that actually felt highly prestigious were Islam versus Volk 1 and Cyborg versus Nunes. This may be a hot take, but not even Conor versus Alvarez felt like a highly prestigious super fight. It felt like a money fight, like the Conor McGregor show, but not a prestigious fight between two of the undoubtable best fighters in their weight classes. Both champions never defended their titles. Conor never defended his title, neither did Alvarez, and they fought each other in the lightweight division. And that's what separates what a true super fight is. When they were talking about GSP going up and fighting Anderson Silva, this is when both of these guys had multiple title defenses, the greatest in each of their divisions, to fight each other. Same with Anderson versus John Jones, and same with John Jones versus Cain Velasquez at the time. There's been many super fights, or the goal of a super fight, but rarely do any of them feel like they're an actual super fight. Other than two, Islam versus Volk and Cyborg versus Nunes. Those are the only two. Man, Conor McGregor really influenced these newer champions. They want to do what he did, right? They want to replicate winning the second belt, getting the big money fights instead of win as many title defenses as you can and build your legacy that way. In fact, they're not even thinking about like their legacy in the same way. Legacy ends when you win the belt, and then it's on to money fights, winning 2 belts and all that sort of stuff. Because if you look at all the champions right now, we now have the first new champions after the Conor McGregor era. That was a very influential era for the fighters at the time. And now we see the new champions that have come after that, like Ilya, Sean O'Malley, Merab, and potentially Arman. There's also Dricus and Tom Aspinall. The rest of them, Alex Pereira, Bilal Muhammad, Islam, and Pantoja, these guys are all around like the same era as Conor McGregor and Habib and all that stuff. They were fighting around that same time. But Aspinall, Dricus, Arman in this example, Ilya, Sean O'Malley, these guys all came after the Conor effect. And Dricus and Aspinall, out of those fighters, are the only ones that are sticking to the old way of building your legacy. Win the belt, stay as champion, and keep defending the title. But Arman, Ilya, O'Malley, Merab, these four want to win the next belt in the next weight class or get the big money fights instead of finding the number one contender and do this all different kind of stuff. Like Merab was calling to fight Sean O'Malley. Arman is saying if he wins the belt, he's only going to go for money fights. His legacy is complete once he wins the belt. Ilya wants to jump up to the next weight class. Instead, he doesn't care to fight a featherweight anymore. O'Malley wanted to fight Ilya Topuria when he won the belt. This is not a good thing for the sport, with champions not staying in their weight classes and not fighting the number one contender. That is the way you grow the sport. And with what Arman and Ilya are doing, it's great for them because they get their money fights, but it's not good for the sport. The UFC has to somehow revert how the sport works back to what it was before the superstars. I don't know how they're going to do it, like promote the fighters better or better matchmaking, because let's be honest, man, the champions of 2024, the most of them didn't fight the deserving number one contender. Jones fought Stipe, Alex fought Khalil, Dricus fought Adesanya, Islam fought Dustin, O'Malley fought Marlon Vera, and Alexander Pantoja fought Kaya Asakura. Almost every single champion in 2024 fought someone that didn't deserve a title shot, but I guess it was given to them by default. And now hearing what Arman is saying, it's like, is this just what the champions are going to be from now on? No one wants to defend their belts, but there are a few. You got to give a lot of respect to Tom Aspinall and Dricus du Plessis. These two champions are also in the same generation of Arman and Ilya, right? They came after the Conor McGregor era, and these two want to defend their belts and be an all-time great of their division. Now, Dricus did talk about going up and fighting Alex, but he's never said things like, I'm not defending my belt, or I don't care about middleweight, or now I'm going for money fights since I became a champion. He never said things like this. He's up for any challenge it is, whether it's in his division or it's in the next division. A lot of respect for Dricus, man, and Tom Aspinall. Now, some of you might ask, what about Bilal Muhammad or Alex Pereira or Alexander Pantoja and Islam? These guys are part of the same generation as Conor. So, they didn't get impacted or influenced by Conor. They're more influenced by the fighters before them, the Anderson Silvas, the John Joneses, the Demetrius Johnsons, the George St. Pierre's. These guys are the ones that those champions are influenced by more than Conor. So Conor was very good for the sport, obviously. Made the company so much money, made so many new fans of the sport, great fights and all that stuff. But he did change a lot of the standard of what the other champions were doing. And because the UFC gave him so many benefits and opportunities, all these other champions want to do the same thing. And with all the other champions after, they might do the same exact thing too. The champions after Islam and Bilal and Merab and Dricus and all these champions, do they also try to mimic the Conor McGregor goal? Or does the sport revert back to defend the title as much as possible? That is much healthier for the sport. What Conor McGregor was able to do is not good for the sport unless they are that superstar, and there is none that are getting 1 million pay-per-view buys with every single one of their fights. Until we get a superstar that could do that, I think that's when the UFC is going to allow that fighter to jump up weight classes and go for money fights, go into boxing and all this sort of stuff. But even at that point, I don't think that's good for the sport. Even for superstars, it'd be great for them to just defend their belts, man. Just defend the belts at least 3 times before jumping up to the next weight class. But these champions are winning the belt and they're already thinking about money fights. It's like the sport will turn into boxing like that. Until they get that 3 title defense thing, I think there should be no talks of double champ stuff or money fights.